of a traditional. Yeah. Wow. He's more into politics, probably. Right. And there's different ways to cover everything. Not one is better than the other. Oh yeah, absolutely. Go. Okay. Hello, everybody. We're about to start. We're right on time, so please be quiet. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here again after a couple of years. I'm really a little bit, it's very good to be here with you. And the panel today is a very important one, something that is really, I'm taking a real interest in that for many years. And it's basically how to critically report on technology and technology policy making. And it's an increasingly important issue that we're just discussing with Julia here, about to present. It was never probably this important before. Even the festival has many panels around technology, algorithms, AI, the use that they have in journalism and civil society, and in society in general. So we're going to speak about this with two founders of two news organizations, basically. They are very different, but they both have this idea of trying to go in depth in reporting into this technological automated society, as we call it. I work for Angwin and Watch, and an NGO that published this report called the Automating Society, and arguing about an automated society. And these two persons here with me are doing it in a very, let's say, original on one hand way, and in the other one, it's basically very, very rigorous and possibly something completely different than what we usually see in mainstream or media reporting, which is something needed, by the way. So I'm here to talk, and I'm humbled to be here to moderate this panel with Julia Angwin, who is co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Markup. And remotely, we should see at some point also Markus Beckedahl, who is founder and editor of Netpolitic, which is another site dealing with tech policy, mostly on the political and technological side of it. And so basically, some background just to get a hold of what we're about to talk here. As I was saying, technology policy and technology are increasingly crucial in our societies. As I said, this automated idea of an automated society rings true even in Europe, even though we're not really used to talk about these things with a European focus, but this has been affecting basically the whole world, so in different ways, of course. So we have different technology policy in Europe, in the US, for example, or in China, which is also, and we have more panels, one tomorrow, for example, discussing precisely these differences on AI policies, for example. But we were also, even before the pandemic and the war, which of course will change the landscape, we were also already on the verge of some kind of tech policy revolution. We had some really important piece of legislation and debates around them all over the world, which were happening and are about to change substantially the way in which we can and cannot deploy and use technology, AI, and other tools in our society, in welfare, in health, in the many respects in which these technologies have been entering the stage, let's say. The problem is that it's very, very difficult to answer some of the questions that are posed by these problems, by these issues. So, for example, you have, first of all, a widespread systematic opacity, so a lack of transparency concerning many of the algorithms that are employed, or the AI solutions, and that we found with research on the ground with this Berlin-based NGO for which I worked, Angwin and Watch. We basically tried to track all the algorithms in use in public policy, basically in Europe, and we found many instances, and basically 90% of them we don't really know what they do. So of course we need precise journalism to look into that. And of course we have powerful players that don't really want to share those details, especially big tech companies, but governments as well, and public administrations, of course. And of course, these issues are very complicated in themselves. So you have free speech, hate speech, you have the future of copyright, you have the future of public health, and the pandemic. We've seen a lot of devices and tools and technologies try to tackle this public health issue, and in some ways try to solve these issues, which is very difficult. The problem here for this panel is that the way in which mainstream tech journalism used to, and used basically, especially in the past, to deal with these issues was not good enough, let's say, not in-depth enough for us to really understand what was going on there. And so it was really tough to find outlets that were going actually in depth, that were actually trying to unpack the algorithms, try to monitor, for example, what happens on social media platforms, like rigorously, quantitatively, and trying, as for example the Markup does, to include some kind of scientific method into journalism, into this kind of journalism, which is all the more important. So what we are asking here today is how to tackle these issues and how they are being tackled, and they have been for a while now, by both the Markup and Netpoliticorg. So my first question is basically a methodological one: how to go about investigating these tools, these algorithms that are playing this increasing role in society, and how to basically with what method, what is the best way to go about it, and how this has been evolving over the last years. Of course, for example, the Markup has been launched in 2020, so they have a couple of years experience on that, but of course Julia has been working on these topics before for ProPublica and other magazines and publications, and Netpoliticorg also has been doing this constantly for many of the developments, especially in Europe, in dealing with technology. So my first question is the same for both Julia and Markus, that I really thank to be here. What is the method, basically? How do you go about researching these things in such a way that we can really understand them and make a good democratic use of them? Julia, if you want to start.
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to be here, and thank you all for coming. I'm going to start a little bit with just a biography of myself and how I got into this, because I think it informs how I approach reporting on technology. So I grew up in Palo Alto, which is the heart of Silicon Valley, and I learned to program computers in 5th grade. Steve Jobs lived in our town, and he had paid for all of the elementary schools to teach programming in 5th grade. So I thank him for my programming education. And my parents were both in the computer industry. At that time, computers were, like that size. And my parents were early into finding ways to use computers for their professions. My dad's a mathematician, my mom's a chemist. And so I grew up sort of steeped in this world. And in fact, I actually thought that there were really only 2 choices of professions: hardware or software. And I just want to tell you, I was a software partisan, and I remain a software partisan. But the 2 have merged more since then. But I really thought that I would go into this industry. I studied math in college. Because they didn't have a computer science degree, I was taking computer science. I worked at Hewlett-Packard in my summers. But I fell in love with the college newspaper and decided that I would just rebel when I graduated and just do journalism for a few years and then come back to my natural state of technology. But of course what happened is I went into journalism, and then the Netscape revolution happened, where everybody suddenly got a web browser. People started to there was a mass understanding of technology that hadn't been there before. And so I was working just as a little reporter, running around Capitol Hill in DC, writing stories for a newswire. And suddenly I was hot property because I was the only journalist anyone knew who knew how to use computers. And so the San Francisco Chronicle hired me to cover technology. They were like, you know what these things are. At that time, there was no internet-connected computer in the San Francisco Chronicle newsroom. This is in 1996. And so I had a computer at home, so at least I could go home and check out what was happening on the internet and write about it. And I tell all this because I want to tell you about the evolution of technology reporting. So at that time, all the people who covered technology were people like me. They were people who knew how to use it. Essentially, they were hobbyists. They were people who worked in their garage on, like they wanted to build computers themselves. And so this field of journalism really arose from people who I would say are more like fans than journalists, right? They were people who were interested in this technology, and the early reporting in technology was primarily which gadget should you buy, right? We'll review this one, I've trusted them, this is the one you should get. And I think that's why it's taken this field some time to evolve into the critical place that it is now, where we're finally applying a critical lens to technology, which is after basically 20 years of giving this industry a free pass. And so we're at a moment where people now realize, look, technology is not just a cool thing that you have that you can communicate with your friends, but is actually, like all tools that humans make, can be used for good or for ill. And it's such a powerful tool that policy is embedded into it, right? It's so easy for policymakers to say, okay, here we're putting this program out there, it's scientific. This program decides whether you get welfare benefits, whether you go to jail. These are things that whether you get hired. These are all things that are embedded in algorithms now, and it allows the people who have power to not take responsibility for their decisions. They just say, look, the computer made the decision, the computer is smart, so trust it. And that's a great free pass for them. But what it means is journalists need to evaluate those algorithms and hold them accountable for the decisions that they make. So now I will actually answer your question, which is, how do you do that? So the way you do that, in my opinion, is however you can, right? That's how journalism always has been. If you can find somebody inside the company to tell you what's actually happening with that computer program, great. If you can find public records that show the outputs of those algorithms and allows you to create an analysis of the pattern, great. If you can scrape a huge amount of data from the internet, which we do all the time at the Markup, that's another way to do it. But I'm actually not a partisan on the methods, and I think it's really important to remember that journalism has to use all the means that we have at our disposal. What we do at the Markup is we overinvest in computational expertise. So the newsroom is half data journalists and half traditional journalists. And what we have chosen as our way of attacking these problems is to make sure we have all the computer resources to use computers to analyze computers, because computers are really good at analyzing other computers, right? It's like a fair fight. And so we use as many computational techniques as we can to analyze things. And I'll give one example, and then I'll stop talking, because I'm sure I'm using more than my time. But one example is Amazon. So when you search for a product on Amazon, their algorithm produces a list of things you can choose from, right? I want some shampoo, they give you a list. What you don't realize, probably, is that the top items in that list are often Amazon brands. So Amazon has a lot of brands. They have more than 150 brands that have other names. They don't say Amazon, they say some other thing. And so you might not know that they're actually sending you towards an Amazon product. Amazon, for 2 years, has been asked by the Congressional Antitrust Committee in the House of Representatives in the US, are you giving preference to your own brands? Because they had been hearing from all these sellers, these people who are trying to sell their own shampoo on Amazon were saying, I can't get into the top listings. But all of that evidence was anecdotal, right? And Amazon kept saying, no, that's just a coincidence. Yes, you're hearing that from those sellers, but there's no pattern here. So what we did was we scraped 15,000 search queries and their results on Amazon, and we analyzed them. And what we found was that we used an interesting technique, a statistical technique called a decision tree, to show what factor was most likely to land you at the top of an Amazon search result. And what it turned out was being an Amazon brand was 8 times more predictive of being the top result than any other factor, including popularity, star ratings, number of reviews, right? So suddenly we had data that showed all of those anecdotes that previously just seemed like people complaining were part of a larger pattern. And so that's what one way to analyze an algorithm, right? And I know that not all newsrooms have that ability to do that type of scrape and that type of analysis, but I offer it as something that we as journalists need to try to get better at, because we do need larger sample sizes in order to prove that these algorithms are doing what they're saying, because we can't really make that case with just 1 or 2 anecdotes in most cases.
Thanks, Julia. And since you mentioned it, I get one more question for you before turning to Markus. I was on a meeting in the Netherlands a couple of weeks ago, and we were discussing automated decision-making in AI in the context of fairness. And we were basically the panel that we composed in the meeting was half computer scientists and half humanities. So basically lawyers, people from civil society. And the stark finding was we really speak different language. We don't really understand each other, even in good faith. People from the computer scientists, let's say computer science, they started saying, okay, we need to optimize for fairness. We need to solve fairness. We need to find a way to model fairness in such a way that it is fair, of course. And of course, lawyers and people from civil society said, okay, we have 26 centuries of discussion around ethics. I'm not sure you're going to solve it with an equation, of course. So since you mentioned, of course, that you have in your newsroom you have this interplay of people, of journalists, let's say, coming from more a humanities side and from people more on data science. How do you tackle it? Is it a problem for you? Do you have active measures to tackle this?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I think that the culture of journalism and the culture of engineering, which is what we're trying to merge at the Markup, are very different. So, and I'm lucky in having sort of grown up in both. And the way I would describe these cultures, and these are gross overgeneralizations, so apologies to people I offend, but in general, I think journalism is a macho solo sport, right? It's about the individual byline. It's about striding through the jungle. I got here. I'm here with the natives. Let me tell you what's happening. And sorry, that's a really terrible way to describe journalism, but there's a hero part of it, right? That even though it is a team sport, there are so many people in the newsroom who support and make that journalism happen, it tends to be an individualistic exercise. Engineering is very team-based because most engineering challenges are too big to be handled by one person. And so even though it's hard for humans to collaborate with each other, engineers have built ways to do it. Oftentimes they prefer to do it through chat instead of speaking to each other. But regardless, they have an understanding that this is a task that is too large for us to do, for me to do on my own, and I'm going to need to really collaborate with these people. And so what I really enjoy about our newsroom is that I feel like that collaborative spirit of engineering has been infused into the individual nature of our normal journalist practice. And almost every journalist and every story that we work on ends up being collaborative in some way, because that spirit has really been infused into the newsroom. It also helps that we're small, right? And so people aren't competing for stories, right? There's not like turf wars. There's only 30 people at the Markup. And so I think that we have added that aspect of engineering. And there's another aspect of engineering which is really nice, which is this idea that it's understandable that you're going to fail, right? It's like iteration. You fail and then you iterate and you fail again. And you know, Silicon Valley has made this into a little bit of a motto, fail fast, which I think, you know, it has a little bit of a toxic element to it because Facebook keeps using it to explain why they fail at everything. But I think that, but at the
we're gonna do better next time.
We're gonna do better, right? Yeah. But I do think that that is actually taken out of their context, but in reality, an embracing of the fact that this stuff is hard, it takes a lot of people, and you are going to make mistakes and just learn from them along the way is a really nice part of the culture that has been added to our journalistic newsroom.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. And come to Markus. Netpolitik has one sentence, I think, describing itself that is really important to me. And it says, we see ourselves as an early warning system for relevant network policy developments and report on topics before they receive general attention. And in my experience, this has been a crucial part of a work of technology journalists, trying to spot trends before they actually go into the mainstream debate so that you can actually shape it in such a way that it has a rational meaning and the debate makes sense and it's not something that actually turns into a moral panic or some kind of techno-enthusiast assumption, oh, this AI is going to solve that, or this AI is going to destroy that democracy, which is not always the case, actually it's almost never. So I like this idea of having a newsroom that is actually works as an early warning system. So Markus, would you want to explain how do you go about doing that?
Hello, yeah, I'm a bit sad that I can't be with you in Perugia. I got COVID last week and now I'm in isolation for another week. Yeah, it was interesting to hear your story, how you started with computers in your use, Julia, because for me it was the same. My father was in the computer industry. I learned programming when I was young. It was always clear that I go into the computer industry when I was older. And then I got fascinated by political processes. And around the end of the 90s, when I was out of school, I had internet, and I found out about how politics work. I also saw that there will be a lot of laws coming up which will change the way we use the internet. And I got really connected to that idea to get more transparency into these processes. And I became an activist to fight against surveillance laws, for example, and started a blog. I called it Netpoliticorg to curate all the developments which were coming. And at that time, around 2003, 2004, it was very easy because our German Bundestag was debating one time a month about internet issues and internet laws. And now when I look back, it's impossible for us to report everything what the Bundestag is doing in 2022 because everything has a digital aspect. But I started this blog and I found other people who also had a technology background and wanted to bring more transparency in these processes and try to raise awareness to the society that a lot of technology debates also are societal relevant debates and a political issue of power. And it took a long time until other media in Germany really understood it. The 0 years, it was a time where lots of media thought, oh, the internet might go away and we don't have to deal with it. And then there was a time where a lot of important debates weren't really reported because it was too complex. I remember the times when journalists told me, oh, I can't use the word server because our audience won't understand it and I only have 80 lines in a text and it's too complex. Now the time is gone, but it showed for us that it's relevant to use the internet, to use our techniques to raise awareness around these issues and report it from a perspective of digital rights. And with the combination of, on the one side, we have technical expertise, and on the other side, we use journalistic ways to report about it. So we are a bit jealous on the markup because we don't have so much computational expertise. Because we lack of funding, we only have funding through our readers. We received around 1 million euros through reader donations last year. We can cover 19 persons. These are 13 persons all together in full time, which is good for us, but we would like to have more coders, for example, but we have them. We have a huge network around us, a network of hackers, civil society activists, organizations which we are collaborating with to do our own scientific research together, or just to translate their work for a global or wider audience and to transport these topics to other media through our reporting and into politics. And for example, we use other technologies like the Freedom of Information Act very regular, because we saw when the law was introduced in 2005, so we have only 17 years of experience with Freedom of Information Act in Germany, that it might be a heavy weapon for journalism. Now, in 2022, it is a common good that Freedom of Information Acts are good for journalists, but in the past it wasn't. So we started using it heavily to get more transparency into political processes and, for example, into lobby in transparency, which helped us to get deeper into the networks of lobbying of the big tech companies, which are very heavily lobbying for their bigger power within Germany, within Europe, and it's not always the best for our democracy. So this is more the way we are working. We bring together a technical background, a journalistic way of reporting, and we work in ecosystems with lots of other parts of civil society or other media.
Thanks, Markus. And a question for both, and I think it is important also for our audience to understand that, of course, both news organizations are no-profits, and they have this idea, basically, that is very important, especially considering what we learned about ads and micro-targeted ads in both by digital platforms and news media organizations. Of course, they also most of them employ tracking of some sort. So both publications pride themselves on not using ads of any source and having a different source of revenue, of course, to make a living, basically, to continue operating. So my question for both is, how do you go about funding your project, and how is it, do you think it is a model that could be replicated? It could be a more general answer, at least in some fields or in some instances, to this business model problem that we've been having in journalism since forever, basically, and how challenging it is to actually do that kind of choice. So I'll start with Markus this time, and then we go to Julia.
Yeah, we have a long history in trying to find out how to finance our work. When I started it, it was part of my company, New Thinking, which did open source infrastructures for civil society and consulting on open source strategies. But around 2011, 2012, we had tried everything from advertisement to, I don't know. And we started building up a non-profit, which was not easy at that time, and still isn't easy in Germany to do a non-profit journalism, because there isn't a tax reduction reason for journalism. There's one for chess and for sports, but not for journalism. So we used the hack of saying, okay, we do consumer protection, and it helped us build up our own non-profit organizations and to take funds which are tax reduced. And since that, we can only rely on readers' donations. As I said, we received 1 million in readers' donations last year, so we are one of the biggest non-profits in Germany. And I think one of the reasons is that we say, okay, no tracking, no bullshit. This is one of our mottos. We can't really report on surveillance issues if we surveil our readers and lose control over the whole ecosystem behind it, as most of the media does. It's a huge scandal that most of journalism is funded by surveillance of their own readers, and nobody knows what happens with all the data and who has control. about it, because everybody lost control in getting some more pennies somewhere. And for us, we are able to remain independent without having to monitor our readers, which is a very good feeling for us. And I think it's a good feeling for our readers too, so they help us. One way we use this reader donation system is that we, for example, have a monthly transparency report. And it helps us to be as transparent as we can. And people now, okay, they need money now, okay, they are fine. It helps us to get a better conversation with our readers about what we do with our money and more trust in what we are doing. And it also helps us against organizations who, for example, say, oh, they have another opinion on the copyright debate. They are funded by Google. This is a usual argument by the publisher industry against us. And we always say, oh, we are totally transparent. What about you? How transparent are you? So this helps us a lot.
Yeah, and let me just say it is impressive to get €1 million in donations, and the amount of transparency you provide is also impressive to me. I've never seen such a thing. It's really detailed, and it continuously updated and divided into sections, so it's really something that you should really, especially if you're in a big newsroom reporting on, surveillance capitalism, blah, 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 and then you adopt it for your reporting or to fund your reporting, as Markus said, sounds a little hypocritical to me, and has always had. Julia, if you want to add something.
Yeah, when I founded the Markup, we committed to a privacy pledge, which was that we would not collect and monetize data about our readers for third parties. So what that means is we don't have any third-party cookies on our website. We don't use a lot of technologies, like for instance, we don't embed YouTube videos into our web pages because they contain tracking technology. It's hard, so we had to build like a little video embed system ourselves. Same thing with embedding tweets. So a lot of the existing technology that's free out there that a lot of websites would use, we have to build because we want our readers to feel that they trust us. And if we're going to write about this surveillance ecosystem, which I call the data exploitation market, we shouldn't be participating in the data exploitation market at the same time. I will say, though, the thing that is so wild about this data exploitation market is even for the news sites that participate in it, it doesn't pay well. So it's a lose-lose situation. You make your readers mad, and you're not making enough money. That's why everyone has to go to a paywall, because the problem with the data exploitation market is there's too much data out there, and so everyone is surveilling everyone, and so everything is worth a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a penny. And so it actually is just not worth it. Even if you wanted to do it, it doesn't pay. And so I think that that's another reason that we have committed, we feel strong about our commitment to it, is it wouldn't support us even if we did do it. So we're entirely philanthropy funded. We had a really generous gift from Craig Newmark, who sponsors this festival as well. And we have a lot of foundations that support us. We are lucky that in the US there's a strong philanthropy sector. The tax laws incentivize donations. There's still not enough donations to journalism just as a field, but we have carved out a nice space for ourselves, and I wish that there was room for more like us. And I would encourage anyone in here who's a funder to give more money to journalism.
I have many more questions, but of course I don't want it to have to be a conversation between ourselves. If you do have questions, please raise a hand and pose it. There is no microphone. I will have to repeat it out loud in the microphone. Please speak up, and I'll repeat it for everybody to listen to.
Yeah, I want to know, often critical tech reporting leads to regulation. Mm-hmm. And so my question is, do you think that policymakers are tech-savvy enough to make appropriate regulation? Do you see there's a danger of over-regulation? the issues you're reporting about. And my additional question would be, if that's possible, do you think the European laws like the GDPR or the Digital Services Act will facilitate the work, your work in the future, like for example?
Okay, so basically the question is about lawmakers, whether they tech savvy enough to actually bring about good regulations, or whether there's a risk of overregulation, and also whether we can make use of this incoming EU law to try and make, if I've correctly understood, to make better journalism, basically, to get better data. So basically, better journalism. Julia, want to start?
I would say that I hear this question a lot. People are very skeptical of lawmakers' technical expertise, and certainly in the US, there have been some hearings where lawmakers asked, really dumb questions like, how do I log into my Facebook or whatever. But I don't think we don't hire our lawmakers to be experts on specific topics. We hire them to have staff who educate themselves and learn about these topics and really are the ones who have expertise. And I would say that in the US, where I'm most familiar, the level of expertise among staff on Capitol Hill has dramatically, exponentially increased, in part because of philanthropic funding that has actually, there's a program, several programs that I think embed technologists in congressional offices, and that has made a very big difference in the sophistication of the technology policy that's being proposed. But I would say that in general, that's a problem with all legislation. It's not really unique to tech, right? I mean, there's everything that all laws are specific to their industries, and there are always problems, and that's why it needs to be an ongoing process of revision and iteration, and laws need to be constantly revised and updated. And I think what's happened with technology policy in the US is that really nothing has passed. So we have some really static laws from the 80s, and then nothing, there's been a lot of hearings and a lot of noise, but we currently don't have any policies updated policies that have passed Congress. And that has to do, I think, in part with some of the dysfunction in Congress, but also because tech policy is a weird space. It's not a place where it's very clear what is the left agenda and what is the right agenda. Like, you know what that is in most fields, but in tech policy, it's no one's quite sure yet where they stand because it's a new area. And honestly, a lot of the problems aren't so easily solved, right? The problem of what to do about hate speech and illegal speech and extreme speech on these platforms is one that is really difficult to solve, and there's not a silver bullet. And so I guess I would say that I have faith in, but I guess I would say that, like, it's a challenging problem, but, like, what is the alternative? Do we just want an authoritarian government that decrees? Because the other options out there are like Russia and China, which have basically nationalized tech and used their own censorship policies, and I don't think that's a good option. And so I guess even though the democratic process is flawed and difficult and cumbersome, it still seems to me like a better option.
Markus, the view from Europe?
Yeah, I'm a bit jealous about the United States that they have this program bringing tech-savvy people into politics, because in Europe and Germany, politics are full of lawyers. It doesn't mean that lawyers don't understand technology. I know a lot of good lawyers who understand technology well, but normally they aren't in politics. And if you take a look who's doing politics, then it's getting better than in the past. 20 years ago, nobody wanted to be responsible for internet issues, and you got the job for being responsible for internet issues when you were a lame duck and got nothing relevant. And now it has totally changed, but at the end, in every political party and also in power in the government, there are only some tech-savvy people who then often have the most tech-savvy staff around, but normally people don't really have tech-savvy people around, but they have lots of experts around. And so we can't really say anymore, as we did in the past, they don't know what they are doing. even if politicians don't really have a clue, which still is true for some of them. They have lots of experts they listen to who have a clue, and it's a question of power and to who you are listening. So when you take a look at the Digital Services Act, you, for example, have lots of different perspectives on it, and you have some who are listening to civil society, but you have others who are listening to all the tech-savvy lobbyists coming from the markets business side, and they have other reasons to lobby than, for example, the civil liberties activists and organizations. So I wish there would be more tech-savvy people in politics, but they aren't. But we see it as our job at Netpolitik to raise awareness around these issues and to get more people motivated to go into politics. And I think over the last 19 years, we got a lot of people motivated in doing it who are now working as staffs or even be a member of parliament.
And I have one quick answer to her question, her second question on GDPR and whether those laws have been helpful. The transparency requirements have been extremely helpful. So there's GDPR, and then there's a law in California that sort of modeled CCPA, the California Privacy Act. And both of them allow citizens to request their own data and get some of it back, and have some other transparency requirements. And those things are extremely helpful to reporters because we can either request our data or ask readers to request it, and then we can find out more about what's happening in the data exploitation market. And so I think the transparency requirements have been great, and I think that other parts of it, like the cookie consent, I don't think has played out the way people expected, right? You're barraged with these boxes, click here, okay, or else go down a nightmarish menu that will never let you free. Is that really truly a choice? And so I think some of those laws, but that's where I believe that the law can be updated, right? I think now that we see that problem, it can be addressed. And so France has done a great job of policing that particular cookie consent, and they have a law. You just have to have accept, reject, and they fine people who don't do it. And so it is possible to improve. So I basically think, you'd start with a first draft law, and then you hopefully improve it.
Let's hope so, and let's hope it doesn't get worse because of lobbying, which is also what might happen, unfortunately, also in Europe. Are there more questions? Oh, here and then there.
So I wanted to ask you what you think about big tech acquiring stocks and media outlets, like what happened with Elon Musk and Twitter, and what is the risk there, and how do we monitor that there is not this control of big tech over information?
Yeah, so the question is basically what Julia thinks, and also Marcus, I think, about what big tech acquiring stocks in digital platforms, and the latest example being, of course, Elon Musk getting into Twitter and getting actually the biggest share, I think.
Yeah.
So it's pretty concerning to me, at least.
Well, I mean, look, all of these tech companies were founded by individuals who sought to control them, right? Mark Zuckerberg still has a controlling stake of Facebook, and Bill Gates at Microsoft and the founders of Google. So they all started with individuals who wanted to control their investments. The difference with Elon Musk is that he's an outside investor who came in with a very clear agenda about controlling speech. And that is disturbing. Now, but that could happen from anybody, right? I mean, Goldman Sachs could come in with an agenda as well and buy a portion of a publicly traded company. And so it's unfortunate. This is a risk that happens with allowing our key areas of public discourse to be completely controlled by private companies. What that means is those private companies get to decide what we can say and what we can't say in public. And that is a bigger problem than Elon Musk buying it. He's just playing the game. We've set the rules of the game this way, and he's like, okay, I know how to play this game. I'll buy my way in. I think that we as society and as citizens we need to figure out what are the parameters around which we place areas of public discourse, right? With television, in the US at least, we used to have these rules around fairness and requirements that the TV broadcasters had a special obligation to present both sides, to be fair. Now, unfortunately, in the US, we dropped that requirement, but let's just assume it still existed. I think that, and I don't know as much about the EU media landscape, but I believe that there are special obligations on areas that control speech. And so I think that this Elon Musk thing is a wake-up call for whether we, as people whose speech is controlled by these platforms, are going to have any say in how they police our speech.
Markus, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I would agree, and I see a big problem in the power of these organizations. And from a German, a European perspective, we don't really have enough access to them because they always say, oh, we are an American company.
Markus, sorry, there is a problem with your with the audio. I don't know if it can be fixed. Sorry, we have some kind of return. Please try to speak again.
Okay, yeah, I would say we have a problem to get access to these organizations, which are sometimes more powerful than the state. They control huge privatized public spheres, as Twitter does, as Facebook does. And if we, as journalists in Germany, go after them, we receive as much information as if we go after weapons merchants. So they don't say anything except what is in their official PR statement. So maybe US American journalists have more access to their headquarters, but if we ask questions or demand answers on questions, they will be sent to Dublin, to their European headquarters, they will be sent to the Silicon Valley, and we mostly never receive an answer. And this is too much power with too less control for journalists. And I hope that maybe the Digital Service Act brings more power, more tools to journalists to go after these big companies, to get them more transparent.
Absolutely. Let's hope so. It's also vital for civil society organizations, by the way. We really, really need the kind of data. There is one question there, sorry, first, and then I'll go to you. Sorry, can you speak up a little bit? Yeah, it's basically a question about the Amazon investigation that Julia were referring to before, trying to understand whether it is possible to actually do it without the tech, basically. And the first part was...
I can phrase it.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically the question was, how did we collect 15,000 Amazon search queries? We did not sit and type 15,000 search queries. We wrote a computer program that automatically plugged them in and collected the queries. So a lot of what we do is automating that data collection because that allows us to do things that we wouldn't have been able to do. I mean, I guess we could have sat there for 3 months and, and done that, but it wouldn't have been a good use of time. And the question you have about what can you do if you're a journalist who doesn't have the skill to write that program, the funny thing is you don't need to have that skill yourself. You just need to know somebody who knows how to have that. And there are a lot of technologists, particularly in universities, who are interested in doing this type of research, who I think are increasingly, at least in the US, interested in collaborating with journalists. And I see that a lot with our competitors, the New York Times, Washington Post. Oftentimes they just collaborate with a researcher outside who does the kind of work we do internally. And so I think that that is maybe a good future for journalism, because I find that computer science students write to me all the time and say, I want to do something good in the world, and all the job options available to me are to go work for these big tech companies. And so I see that there's a lot of interest out there in doing this kind of work among students, among faculty. And so I would encourage journalists who don't have that skill themselves to partner with people who do.
We have 10 minutes. There were questions. There was one here and one there. I'm sorry, they raised it first. And we have 10 minutes, so we'll try to answer both. Go. Go, please. Okay, whether writing a report on digital poverty influences the actual policy making on that kind of topic. So whether, and it's basically relating to one of the questions that I would have done myself, basically about impact. Basically the impact you're doing with your work, and whether you think that actually this reporting is changing the way in which policy making is done.
So my experience is that these data-driven analyses have great impact, because it gives regulators something to hold on to. So for instance, the Amazon reporting, like I said, they just had anecdotes, but then when they got our report, they actually wrote a letter to Amazon and said, it appears that you have perjured yourself in front of Congress. Please explain. Amazon responded in a way that was unsatisfactory, and the House committee has just referred this issue to the Department of Justice for a criminal investigation. So Amazon is now under criminal investigation because of our report. And I don't know what will happen with that, but I do think hopefully, at the very least, perhaps it's a disincentive for them to lie to Congress in the future. So I think that in today's world, data is the currency that regulators need. And so I think it's actually a good thing that our policy debates are informed by data, and the companies have the ability to pay think tanks and friendly researchers to come up with reports that make it seem like if you do this regulation, something bad will happen. And our job as journalists is to provide that counterpoint. So when we provide data, it does often lead to impact. We did a huge analysis of mortgage approval algorithms and showed that they were biased against Black and Latino applicants. A Black applicant and a white applicant who had the same exact financial characteristics, the Black one would be rejected at many more times frequently than the white one. And that launched an investigation from several financial agencies have announced an investigation of redlining in mortgage algorithms. So this kind of impact comes because we give them millions of data points to base their questions on. So I am actually very hopeful about the impact that we can have with this work.
There was one last question, I think, or let's see if we can get two, but one for sure.
Yeah, I had a question sort of about Web3, whether it exists or not. Has this, because some of the stories coming out about these companies, like WorldCoin was a recent one, it's kind of crazy. Is it kind of low-hanging fruit for you guys, or is it made it more difficult because it's now a crossover into the finance world, which is another knowledge bubble kind of thing? So yeah.
So basically it's a question about Web3, these hot buzzword that we've been speaking about a lot in tech circles, and whether it's a low-hanging fruit of some sort.
So Web3, for those of you who don't know, is a mythical world that doesn't exist based on the blockchain. And the blockchain, for those of you who don't know what it is a way for you to provide a ledger of transactions. It's a transactional ledger that's public. The people who engage in those transactions are often anonymous, but it is a sort of an attempt at a public accountability system. And there are a lot of people who are placing a lot of faith in a future that will be based on this system. There are many problems with this system. I will mention one or maybe two. One incredibly important problem with this system is it's irreversible. When you do a transaction on this ledger, you cannot reverse it. So that means when there's fraud, it cannot be fixed. It's not a surprise that there has been a huge amount of fraud in this industry, because the moment you get someone to do a transaction like this, you have the money and you can run. And our financial system is built actually on a different basis. So the banking system, a system I participate in, you have a know your customer rule. So the bank has to know who they're transacting with, and they have reversibility. Not always, right? There's definitely fraud that people get away with, but it's much less because the banks talk to each other. They say, and if you've ever tried to do a wire transfer, there's a waiting period, right? There's actually systems in place to make sure that you can reverse something if it's incorrect. And that is something that we call due process. I think it's really important. I am a big fan of due process. I think it should be built into all systems. The crypto people believe that they can build a utopian world where you don't need that because you're building trust with people individually and you don't need intermediaries. Maybe they're right. I'm going to wait and let them play it out and see how it works out before I participate.
Markus, you want to add something on this, or the last questions that have been asked?
I would totally agree with Julia on this question, but I will answer the last question about the impact of our work, because the impact of our work is not that we work with data, but I think since we are an early warning system, our biggest impact is shaping the perspective on how to see a tech policy debate within journalism and within politics. And we are only a small media outlet, but I think we have a huge impact on the German debate, and the industry is hating us because we are sometimes stronger with our perspective than they are with their huge millions of lobbying and PR money.
Nice, very nice. I think it's last question, but a very quick one. Oh, okay.
Could you speak louder?
Yeah.
Please do more as in a society is fundamental that we problem this topic. I'm a scientist and I love to see more collaboration and then problem this topic because it shapes our future.
Okay. If you wanted to.
I'll just summarize for the video stream that
I have problems hearing.
she is urging all of us to do more to cover this topic, how important it is for society.
Yeah, and I think we trying our best. And one remark that I want to make, being a freelancer and mostly unemployed, and unemployed, all the time for the last 20 years, we need money to do more. We need more money. Okay, I hope it's clear enough. But we need more funding, and in the U.S. there are ways to get it. Basically, in Europe it's drying out really. So if anybody's listening, remotely or here, we really want to work on this because it's really important in many respects. And with the pandemic and the war, can you imagine public health and possibly dealing with the kind of confrontation that we're dealing with in Ukraine? There are systems, of course, that are automated also for that, to deal with the war, of course. Even in case of nuclear confrontation, there are automated systems to deal with that, unfortunately, given what we know. So we should really do more. And luckily, I think the main message from this panel is that we are doing more. And there are many more tech journalists. And as Markus said, tech is everywhere now compared to some years ago. So I'm confident, that as a tech journalist, I won't be unemployed for a lot of time, because we need it more, apparently. So let's hope so. We have a concluding remark, Julia?
I think that was the best way to end it.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Markus. Let's hope to meet soon. Thank you.
That was a great ending. Send us money.
Send us money. Good job. Let me do my work.